there's a wonderful old Kubrick movie called Dr. Strangelove, where the military and civilians seem to be all crazed to go towards war. I assume you assume that, or you think that that film, which was very influential in its day, was an extreme view of the workings of our government at the top level.
The film was a caricature. That's not bad. It's all right for art to be a caricature. It used an extreme situation and extreme and bizarre action from extreme people to make a point. And the point was the danger of nuclear war, the danger of an accidental nuclear war, the danger of a war by miscalculation. All of those were very real dangers in nuclear war. They probably would never have transpired like that movie had transpired, but they were real dangers, real problems. The example I used in starting off my talk of a war being started by accident and miscalculation were all too real.
Well, there was, of course, another movie that starred someone I was always in love with for decades. She went for Frank Sinatra instead of for me. Her name is Ava Gardner, and she was on a beach in Australia, and it's called On the Beach. And that tried to give you a view of the world in which we were lost, because there had been such an exchange of nuclear weapons that there was a cloud of radioactivity coming from the southern hemisphere to kill all of us in the northern hemisphere, and the planet would be finished with humans. Even though you might also have been in love with Ava Gardner, I assume you think that film was also an extreme view.
I think it would never happen the way that film showed it, even in a massive exchange. But I do say, and I say quite seriously, that a massive nuclear exchange would have brought about the end of civilization. It might not have killed all the humans, but it certainly would have brought about the end of civilization as we understand it.
Okay, I'm going to give you a rest for a moment as I struggle to get down the steps to ask the audience. Perhaps the senator has a question. Senators always have a question.
Yes, they do. And truth be told, I prepped the secretary ahead of time that I had two questions. One is the authorization of $180 billion by the Congress over the next 10 years for the nuclear establishment. Then the other question is if the secretary would speak to the targeting that exists right today with the nukes that we have. Thank you for your response.
On the first question, the President has proposed and the Republican leadership has supported the idea of spending $10 billion a year on our nuclear establishment, which is about what we're spending now, a little higher than that. But he's assuring it for 10 years. And you can't really assure it, as you well know, because the Congress doesn't authorize that far ahead. But it is making a commitment to support it for those years. The reason for doing that was to convince the members of Congress that the administration was serious about maintaining the deterrence force during this period when we're reducing our weapons, in order to get the congressional support for ratifying reductions in nuclear arms, in order to get Senate support for ratifying a comprehensive test ban treaty. You have to provide them with assurance that our nuclear weapon scientists are capable of maintaining the deterrence without designing new weapons, without building new weapons, without testing new weapons. And that money was put in there to provide the scientific capability, the simulation capability. It can do those things without testing, without building new weapons. It probably won't happen exactly that way, and that much money probably won't be spent. But the symbolism that you have to maintain your scientific capability in nuclear weapons, if you're not building more weapons, if you're not testing, but you're still trying to maintain deterrence. That's the whole point of it. The second question had to do with targeting. When I was the Secretary of Defense way back in a little more than a decade ago, President Clinton and President Gorbachev came to an agreement to de-target our ICBMs and SLBMs so that they would not have Russian cities and factories and so on as their targets. And that was done. Now, the people who have criticized that decision as being an empty gesture have said, well, they could be retargeted in a matter of seconds, which is true. Computers can work that fast. We could do it. The advantage of it, however, was that if there were to be an accidental launch, it would not end up in Moscow or some other, or Beijing, say. The other aspect of that question is, which you didn't say explicitly, but which has always been on my mind, is why do we need so many nuclear weapons for so few targets? And the calculus that was done during the Cold War made two different assumptions, which were probably reasonable during the Cold War. The first was that there would be defenses, or there would be reliability problems, and so they ended up targeting 2 or 3 missiles for every target. And that led then to a calculation and really an obscene number of nuclear weapons. So we can go down for years in reductions, you know, with 10, 20, 30% reductions per year for the indefinite future, and still end up with hundreds of nuclear weapons, many more than are needed to really threaten another country.
The senator was Senator Gravel of Alaska fame, no longer in the Senate, but he was from Alaska before Sarah Palin. And now we have a question from our law school.
Yes, Professor Perry. You've made the convincing case. You've made the convincing case that American conventional superiority would argue for our own reduction in nuclear weapons. I wonder what you think was happening in Gaddafi's inner circle as the first cruise missiles struck Libya. Whether someone in that circle didn't scratch their heads, if not Gaddafi, about why he ever gave up his nuclear weapons program. The implication, of course, being that for states such as North Korea and Iran as well, the so-called denial of access strategy argues for their dependence on nuclear weapons as a way to counter the conventional superiority of the United States.
Yes, North Korea has already specifically come out with a statement, aren't we glad we didn't give up our nuclear weapons like Libya did? Because if Libya had kept it, if Libya had actually developed nuclear weapons as they were planning to do, they would not be subjected to this kind of an attack. That's an interesting argument, and there may be some validity to it. And whether or not I believe it or not, it's certainly true that North Korea believes it, and that Libya believes it, and a lot of other countries in the world believe it. And therefore, that's a considerable impetus for nuclear proliferation. There are dozens of countries out there who feel threatened one way or the other, and therefore they feel that the way to deal with that threat is to get nuclear weapons. The problem with their argument is what a chess player would call the fallacy of the last move. Each country believes that if it gets nuclear weapons, then it solves its problem because the other country would not go to have nuclear weapons. Israel felt that in the Middle East, for example. North Korea felt if they get nuclear weapons, it would deter the United States from taking conventional actions against them. That argument is going to make it very, very difficult going on in the future to get countries like Iran not to go to nuclear weapons, to get countries like Syria not to go to nuclear weapons, and to get countries like North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons. I see that as the biggest single obstacle to moving forward. The only way of dealing with it objectively is what we're really trying to do with North Korea when we were negotiating with them in the latter part of 1999-2000. I was actually the one doing the negotiating, was to provide them a security guarantee, a security assurance, so they could be confident that they were not going to be attacked by the United States. And we were in the process of doing that when the negotiations fell apart for reasons I don't want to go into right now. But in general, the only way you can deal with that argument is to give the country that feels that they're being threatened by somebody else's conventional forces with some sort of security guarantees.
Dr. Perry, I hope this is consistent with your concept that you're expressing. We've learned in recent days from the nuclear reactors in Fukushima that they perhaps pose an even more onerous danger to us as static nuclear bombs than we may have estimated in the past. It seems to me we're learning for the first time extensively how these reactors work and how dangerous those fuel rods can be if they're not covered with water. It seems that we have not yet found a solution for neutralizing those fuel rods or placing them in places where they will not pose a danger to the public. I would appreciate whatever reaction you might have to that question.
I would start off by concurring with your concern about having a medium to long-term solution to the problem of dangers of nuclear reactors, in particular the storage of fuel rods. Secondly, I would disagree on one aspect of it. I would not compare that danger, the danger to the public, as being of the same magnitude as the danger of a nuclear weapon detonation. The former, we are concerned about a disaster, an economic disaster, and maybe thousands of deaths. In the case of a nuclear attack, we're talking about millions of deaths. So they don't compare in terms of magnitude, although both of them, certainly the nuclear reactor disaster is a major catastrophe. It's just not at the same level of magnitude. Finally, I think the way of dealing with the problem over the medium term, short to medium term, is to take the fuel rods away from the reactors and store them in dry storage underground. I think that's a safe way of storing them that would not be subject to the kind of problems we're seeing now at Fukushima. The objection to that storage is that you can only assure it for so many hundreds of years, and yet the radioactive material is going to be active for thousands of years. So you have to have a better answer than that over the long term. Over the long term, there are under development now forms of special kinds of reactors which actually burn the spent fuel, to get rid of it, to take the radioactivity away from it. That solution is probably 50, 60, 70 years away, but it does lend itself to a solution over the long term.
Wonderful answers. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I would like to say to the rest of the audience that in his generosity he has brought us 50 copies of his wonderful film, Nuclear Turning Point. I will put them out near the wine later, so for all of you who want, please only take one because there is a large crowd here. Secondly, I would like to say to you that there is a fishbowl outside, and in that fishbowl, if you put your name and email, you will get an email from us for the rest of your life about some really great programs we have coming, thanks to Angelina Yee, the wonderful and entertaining and vivacious Hong Kong trade representative who can tell you why not only love is a many-splendored thing, but Hong Kong remains forever a very splendid place. And there's a flyer about him outside also and the event that's coming. We also have heard now from the San Francisco Giants that they expect to win the World Series again. And so they're coming here to tell you all about it because we have an inside track at a USF graduate who works for them. So we have many interesting programs coming. We would like to see you here again. And please join me before you go out and drink wine and eat our cheese that thank Secretary Perry for coming. Magically, those should open.